After experiencing major success with his animated shorts in the late 1920s and early 1930s, Walt Disney wanted to take animation to the next level by doing something no one had ever done before, bringing feature-length animated adventures to the big screen. Using his Silly Symphony series as a stepping stone for his animators to experiment with and refine their craft, Walt jumped headfirst into the production of his first feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The success of Snow White in 1937 sparked an entertainment juggernaut, and audiences demanded more and more feature animations, leading Walt on an unstoppable conquest of feature filmmaking. However, in 1942, this uninterrupted period of creativity would come to a halt when the outbreak of war harnessed the studio's ability to invest in large-scale productions. This 5-year period would see the release of 5 classic animated feature films, all of which were critical successes, but most of which were box office failures, and would go on to be known as the Golden Age of Disney Animation, spanning the entire feature output from 1937's Snow White through to 1942's Bambi. This era is most notable for its fierce focus on the experimentation of animation and special effects and their relationship with long-form story and narrative, and the development of the art form as a whole, paving the way for artists and storytellers in the field forever after. To celebrate the release of Tim Burton's live-action remake of Dumbo and the groundbreaking era of Disney animation that inspired it, I aim to rank the entire 5-picture Disney Golden Age in order of my own personal preference. Let's get into it. Kicking off our list at number 5 is Bambi. Bambi is an absolutely gorgeous film and one of the best displays of animation from Disney's golden age. From the spectacular use of the multi-plane camera to create a deeply layered forest and deliver background animation like never before, right down to the creature animation, which displayed some of the most revolutionary real movement in Disney's young history. In fact, Bambi almost solely exists for the pure and simple reason that Walt Disney and his animators wanted to develop new techniques for movement in animation, studying live animals in the studio for their aid. In the process, also developing many technological advancements in the animation of nature and its forces. Sadly though, Bambi's technological advancements come somewhat at the cost of the film's story. With so much effort put on how the picture looked, the substance of how Bambi's story was told is almost lost. Bambi has a slowly moving narrative that at times can be a little hard to trudge through as it jumps in its time frame, and thus as a result its narrative tone multiple times, hindering any kind of narrative consistency. It's a great display of animation depicting the 4 seasons, but it's a little confusing story-wise. Due to the nature of Bambi's structure, the film almost feels episodic without a proper narrative arc or fully fleshed characters. It's plain and simply lacking in depth. Add to that Bambi's dark nature and melancholy tone, which make this an incredibly mature Disney feature that has infamously scarred generations of young viewers. Again, Bambi is a spectacular film and an undeniable masterpiece of the art form, but compared to the other films in its company, sadly Bambi delivers the least entertainment value of the bunch and isn't one I feel a huge emotional connection to, narratively at least. At number 4, Dumbo. You could say that Dumbo is almost the exact opposite of Bambi. It's one of the least technologically innovative features in Disney's golden age, or even arguably in Disney's history. Dumbo was built by Walt Disney to be a somewhat disposable picture, a film with an incredibly small budget and runtime that was made for the sole reason to make the money back that the studio had lost at the box office on its 2 preceding films, Fantasia and Pinocchio. As a result of Dumbo's stripped budget, the film took on a simplistic style, with far less detail than any of the other animation during this time period. However, in contrast to Bambi, Dumbo's simplicity allowed animators to wholly invest in their story and characters. If they couldn't tell their story through spectacular animation, they had to make sure they had a solid narrative that would hold the audience's attention. This isn't to say that Dumbo's animation is terrible or lackluster. In fact, in its simplicity, Dumbo becomes one of the most unique, stylish, and beautiful Disney animations of all time. Utilizing modest yet highly effective watercolor backgrounds, one of the only Disney animations to ever do so, that allowed marginally more time to be put into emotive character animation, which the film delivers in spades. Despite its 63-minute runtime, Dumbo manages to tell more of a story than Bambi, with deeply layered, expressive characters, all of whom have entirely fleshed story arcs. The arc of Dumbo finding his place in the world, soaring from zero to hero, is a riveting tale of heroism and the triumph of the human spirit, or the animal spirit. It's an incredibly inspirational underdog story that I just absolutely adore and have since childhood. Yes, Dumbo is another darkly moving Disney feature which takes a pretty deep dive into trauma territory, but in its case, it does so to drive the narrative and to help the audience connect with the plight of this troubled baby elephant. Dumbo may have had a small budget, but it has an enormous heart. At number 3, Pinocchio. Disney historian J.B. Kaufman has called Pinocchio Walt Disney's epic. In terms of scope and scale, Pinocchio was perhaps the largest of Walt Disney's animated features. Pinocchio, the studio's second release, had a gigantic budget, almost double that of Snow White, and as a result offered an incredible incentive for animators to experiment and innovate with their craft in both character and background animation. Pinocchio is a practically perfect piece of art, displaying some of the most incredible traditionally animated sequences in the history of the art form. The movie cemented Disney as the undeniable master of their craft, with groundbreaking textures, movements, and effects never seen before, and arguably some never seen since. However, unlike Bambi and Dumbo, Pinocchio treats animation and narrative as mutually exclusive, putting equal focus and attention to detail on both aspects of the film. The film is heartwarming, heartbreaking, and tender, with a story that grips you tightly and throws you through all the emotions you could ever imagine. Pinocchio is perhaps one of the most gripping, engaging, and intense films of all time, and it's animated. Can you imagine just how much of a revelation this must have been in 1940, where only 4 years earlier, Hollywood had balked at the possibility of an animated film moving an audience? Pinocchio is one of those rare traditional animations that is so stunning, so perfect, that at times it's easy to forget you're watching ink and paint on cells and not real life. Pinocchio is such a special movie to me. Its terrific characters and memorable music are so much ingrained in my very being, and I have nothing but pure love and admiration for it. Coming in at number 2, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was the first feature-length, traditionally animated film of all time, and a film dubbed Walt's Folly by the pessimistic media, who didn't believe it would be possible or successful. But Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs became one of the single most innovative feature films of the 20th century, forging the path for the art form going forward. To imagine the sheer magnitude of Snow White at the time of its release, we must simply compare the animation of the film to that of Steamboat Willie, which was released only 9 years earlier. The enormous jump that the Disney studio made in the innovation of animation in the space of a decade is perhaps one of the largest jumps in the shortest space of time in the history of cinema. No, the animation in Snow White is certainly not perfect. In fact, the leap between the animation of Snow White and Pinocchio is perhaps comparable between the leap between Steamboat Willie and Snow White. The movie has a lot of artistic flaws, but that doesn't mean it isn't stunning. Snow White is simply a beautiful film, with a simple yet touching story and characters with warm hearts and distinctive personalities, something never quite seen in animation previously. It's a movie that made audiences in 1937 cry, something Walt had hoped to achieve, and one that still makes audiences cry today. However, it's not just what Snow White represents to the history of animation and cinema that makes me love it so much, but the way that it acts so symbolic of the struggle we all face to make something of ourselves and strive bigger and better every day. The story of Walt Disney's personal tenacity in making the film, the real-life David and Goliath story of a man defying all odds and pressures placed upon him by everyone but a scarce few who believed, is such a great source of inspiration for myself. In retrospect of Walt's entire life and career in forming his entertainment empire and in changing the way in which we view and consume media, this struggle is such a recurring theme and one of the reasons I admire and idolize Walt as much as I do. What we can learn from Walt and his folly in making Snow White is that a dream is the strongest thing on the planet, and combine that with ambition and a little faith, trust, and pixie dust, and you can make any dream a reality. And coming in as my number 1 Disney Golden Age film, Fantasia. Next to Snow White, Fantasia was quite easily Walt Disney's most ambitious film of all time. A feature-length bill of silly symphony-esque sequences, which Walt and his filmmakers used as a tool to not only experiment with music and cinema, developing the world's first surround sound system in the process, but to also further revolutionize technical, special effects, and experimental animation in film. Fantasia presents 7 individual segments, each artistic visualizations of well-known movements of classical music, and each completely different in conception, style, and design, with Walt literally allowing his animators to experiment with whatever techniques and colors they felt necessary to display their visions. The result is a wonderful showcase of Disney animation at the height of its golden age, and one of the most impressive art house films of all time. In fact, the movie was so avant-garde, it was looked upon by audiences at the time as pretentious, and didn't even make back half of its budget at the box office. Looking beyond the surface though, Fantasia is one of the greatest examples, if not the greatest example, of how music can be used in cinema, not only to evoke emotions, but to quite simply tell a story. Fantasia is in essence a silent film, relying only on music to guide the narrative, and in some instances stand in for sound effects. The crashing of drums and cymbals creating stamping of enormous dinosaurs, the Celesta piano signifying the light footsteps of fairies. I cannot think of another movie which uses music and music only to such incredible effect. Fantasia has been one of the greatest and most inspirational tools for myself as a filmmaker, opening my mind unlike any other film. The film can teach us so much about storytelling by stripping back the layers and cutting right to the emotive core, in the way it shows us how to visualize a story, simply through the exploration of the relationship between musicality and the moving image. Fantasia is Walt's true masterpiece, the film that proved animation could be more than just cartoons, with some of my favourite ever sequences of classic Disney animation. Regardless of how it was overlooked at the time, and to be completely honest, even still is now, Fantasia is one of the single most important milestones in animation and film history. And at that, it's over to you. How do you personally rank the Disney Golden Age movies? Which ones do you love? Which ones do you not love so much? Fire away in the comments below with your rankings and thoughts, but as always guys, stay civil. No 2 rankings will ever be the same. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos, you like what you've seen, you'd like to see more like this in the future, then please don't forget to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen right now, and also hit that like button down below if you're feeling extra generous. Also, don't forget to check out my many social media accounts, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thanks for watching guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day.